Before I tell you this story, I need you to understand something. I don't scare easily. I never have. I'm the kind of person who watches horror movies alone at 2 a.m. with the lights off, just for fun. But there is one sound, one specific sound, that I still cannot listen to, even now, more than a decade later. It's the sound of a woman crying through a wall. If you ever hear it, I want you to do something differently than I did. I want you to leave the room. Because I didn't. I pressed my ear against that wall night after night, trying to understand something that was never meant to be understood. My name is Adele. This happened to me and my family in the fall and winter of 2013, in an apartment complex on the outskirts of Boston. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why I still can't sleep with my back to a wall. I was 16. My family had just moved into a newly built apartment complex, the kind of building where the paint still smelled fresh and half the units sat empty with "for lease" signs in the windows. We were one of the first families to move in. My room was in the back, near the kitchen, and I shared it with my little sister Grace, who was in the 4th grade. My parents' room was up front, near the living room. It was a good apartment, a safe apartment. For the first 4 or 5 months, nothing was wrong with it at all. By early autumn, the building had started to fill in. The unit to our left and the unit to our right both had tenants now, though I'd never actually met either of them. I was a homebody. School, home, repeat. And I didn't think much about the people living on the other side of our walls. That changed on a Tuesday night, a little after 11 p.m. I remember the exact moment. I had just turned off my bedside lamp. Grace was already asleep beside me. I closed my eyes, and that's when I heard it. Crying. Not loud, not dramatic. It was the kind of crying someone does when they're trying not to be heard. Muffled, swallowed, held behind a closed hand or a pillow. The kind of grief that's trying to stay hidden. I opened my eyes and lay there in the dark, listening. What is that? The sound stopped. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then it came back, longer this time and closer to the surface, like whoever was crying had stopped trying to hold it in. I told myself it was the neighbor. Made sense. The apartments were built wall to wall, practically stacked on top of each other, and the crying seemed to be coming from the left side, where my mother had mentioned a young family lived, a husband, a wife, and 1 child. Maybe they were fighting. Maybe something had happened. It wasn't my business. Eventually, I fell asleep. It happened again a few nights later. Same time, just past 11. Same soft, restrained crying. This time it didn't stop after a few minutes. It kept going, long enough that I finally got out of bed and pressed my ear to the wall between our rooms, trying to confirm what I was hearing. That's when I noticed the first thing that didn't make sense. The wall was warm. Not warm like a house in summer. Warm like when you touch the back of a running refrigerator. A dry, radiating heat that had no business being inside a bedroom wall in October. I told myself it had to be an appliance. Maybe they kept a fridge against that wall, or a stove backed up close to it. It was a strange explanation, but it was better than the alternative. Because the alternative wasn't something I was ready to think about yet. Weeks passed. The crying returned. 3rd time, 4th time, I stopped counting. It was always around 11 p.m., and each time it seemed to grow a little louder, a little less restrained, like whoever or whatever was doing it had stopped caring whether anyone heard. One night, I turned off the air conditioning in our room just to eliminate any possible interference. I held my breath and listened as hard as I could. The wall was warm again. The crying was unmistakable. And then something happened that I still think about more than anything else from that entire year. The crying stopped on the left side of the room and started again. Closer, deeper. Inside the room, not from the wall at all, but from somewhere near me, low and resonant, like it was coming from underneath the floor or from inside the air itself. I opened our bedroom door and looked out into the hallway, my heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing. Silence. I checked on my parents, asleep, undisturbed. I went back to bed, and the sound had vanished entirely, like it had only existed for the one person meant to hear it. I didn't sleep again until the sky started turning gray. I need you to understand. Up until this point, I hadn't told anyone. Not because I wasn't scared, but because I needed to know I wasn't imagining it. A part of me still needed a rational explanation, and the only way to test that was to find out if someone else could hear it too. So one night, when the crying started again, I woke Grace up. She was 9 years old, groggy, annoyed at first, until I told her to press her ear to the wall. She did, and I watched her face change in the dark. She went very still, the way kids go still when they sense something is wrong before they have the words for it. She turned to me and whispered, barely audible, "Who's crying, Cock?" I told her I didn't know. We lay back down, side by side, not talking, both of us wide awake, listening to a stranger's grief bleed through the walls of our home, until the crying finally stopped sometime after 1:30 in the morning. I went to school the next day running on no sleep. I remember sitting in class, staring at the clock, replaying the sound in my head, trying to convince myself it had a simple explanation. It didn't feel simple anymore. That night, I finally told my mother. "Every night, I hear a woman crying. It's coming from next door." My mother, tired from work, offered the obvious answer. Maybe the neighbors were fighting. Maybe a marriage was falling apart on the other side of that thin drywall. I pushed back. "It's not just once, Mom. It's been going on for weeks, and it's long, sometimes over an hour. I can't sleep." My mother sighed. "I don't know either, sweetheart. That family keeps to themselves." She was right about that, at least. In 5 months, we hadn't so much as exchanged a wave with them. My mother loved to cook, and she loved sharing what she cooked even more. So one afternoon, she packed up rice, vegetables, and a few side dishes, and sent Grace and me to deliver a plate to the neighbors we'd never met. I remember thinking, half joking, that maybe I'd finally get to solve the mystery. I knocked. The door opened, and a woman stood there, mid-30s maybe, tired eyes, but polite. "Can I help you, sweetheart?" "Hi, my mom made too much food, so she wanted to share some with you." "Oh, come in, come in." That's how I met Eliza. Inside, everything looked completely ordinary. Family photos on the wall, a husband reading in the living room, a little boy, maybe 5 or 6, playing with toy cars on the carpet. They looked like the kind of family you'd see in a stock photo. Nothing broken, nothing haunted, nothing wrong. And then I followed Eliza toward the kitchen so she could transfer the food onto her own dishes, and that's when the ground shifted under me. Our bedroom, Grace's and mine, was supposed to share a wall with this apartment. I'd built an entire mental map of their unit based on where the crying seemed to come from. But standing in Eliza's kitchen, I realized the layout was wrong. Our bedroom wall didn't line up with any bedroom in Eliza's apartment at all. It lined up with her kitchen. And there was no refrigerator against that wall, no stove, nothing that could explain the heat I'd felt for weeks. I stood there, holding an empty plate, running the numbers in my head. If it's not the fridge, if it's not a stove, what's making that wall hot at 11 o'clock every night? and a colder question right behind it. If this is her kitchen, and there's no one else crying in this apartment, was it Eliza herself, standing alone in the dark, crying at the exact same time, every single night? I said thank you, walked home in a daze, and didn't sleep that night either. Not from the crying, but from the arithmetic that refused to leave me alone. Is where the story goes somewhere I never expected, and where I started looking for answers instead of just listening. After that visit, something in me shifted. I stopped being a scared teenager hoping the sound would just go away, and I became obsessed with figuring out what it actually was. I started small. I asked my mother, casually, if she knew anything about the building before it was an apartment complex. She didn't. We'd only been there 5 months, and the whole complex had been built recently. But she remembered something the leasing agent had mentioned in passing during our move-in tour. Something she hadn't thought twice about at the time. The complex had been built on a parcel of land that used to hold an older, much smaller building. A 2-family house that had stood there for decades before it was torn down. That was all she knew, but it was enough to send me down a rabbit hole. I spent an afternoon at the public library, the old-fashioned way, digging through local newspaper archives on microfilm, because in 2013, that's still how you found this kind of thing. I searched under the street address. Most of what came up was nothing. Zoning permits, a small fire in the 90s that got put out before it spread, routine records. But one article stopped me cold. It was from almost 20 years earlier. A woman had died in the house that used to stand exactly where our apartment complex now stood, in the same footprint, more or less, as the wing containing our unit and Eliza's. The article was brief, almost clinical, the kind of small local piece that runs once and is forgotten. It mentioned a domestic dispute. It mentioned that she had been found in the kitchen. It did not go into detail about how she died, and back then, I didn't push hard enough to find out more. I was 16, reading old newspaper reels in a library that closed at 6, and frankly, part of me didn't want to know. But there was one detail I couldn't stop thinking about. The woman had a young daughter who survived her. A daughter who, according to the article, had been the one to find her. I remember sitting in that library chair with a cold feeling crawling up the back of my neck, because I realized something. If the old house's kitchen had once stood in roughly the same spot where Eliza's kitchen now stood, the same spot where I felt that wall go warm every night at 11, then whatever I was hearing wasn't coming from a living person crying quietly in her kitchen at all. It was coming from a kitchen that didn't exist anymore, layered underneath the new one, like a photograph left in a drawer under 100 newer photographs, still faintly bleeding through. I wish I could tell you I stopped listening after that. I didn't. If anything, knowing there might be a story behind the sound made me more drawn to it, not less. I told myself I was gathering evidence. Really, I think some part of me wanted to understand her, whoever she was. About 2 weeks after the library visit, the crying came again at its usual time. I did what I'd done dozens of nights before, pressed my ear to the warm wall, closed my eyes, listened. But this time, without really planning to, I whispered into the wall. I know something happened here. I'm not trying to hurt you. Who are you? The crying stopped. Not faded, stopped. Instantly, mid-sound, like someone hitting pause. For a few seconds there was nothing, just my own heartbeat and Grace's slow breathing behind me. And then, so quiet I almost convinced myself afterward that I'd made it up, I heard a single word pressed through the plaster, in a voice that didn't sound like it was speaking so much as remembering how to. Lily. I don't know if it was a name. I don't know if it was the name of the woman from the article or her daughter or something else entirely. I never found it in the newspaper piece. The article never named her. But I heard it, clear as anything. And then the wall went cold under my hand all at once, like a switch had been thrown, and the room felt different, lighter, emptier. The crying never happened again after that night. Not once. Not in the weeks that followed, not in the months after that, not for the rest of the time we lived in that apartment. Here's the part of the story I've never said publicly before, and the reason I'm finally telling it now. About a month after the crying stopped, I ran into Eliza in the parking lot. We hadn't spoken since the day I dropped off the food. I asked her, as casually as I could manage, if everything was all right, if she and her family were doing okay. She looked at me strangely, the way adults look at kids who ask questions they aren't supposed to be able to ask. Then she said something I've never fully been able to shake. She said that for months, she'd been waking up in the middle of the night, standing in her own kitchen, with no memory of getting out of bed. Her husband had found her there more than once, just standing at the counter in the dark, crying, with absolutely no memory of why. She said the last time it happened was the same week the crying on our side had stopped for good. And after that night, it never happened to her again either. I never told my mother that part. I'm not sure I fully believed it myself, not in the daylight, not with my normal brain turned back on. But I believed it enough, standing in that parking lot, looking at Eliza's face, to feel the same cold drop in my stomach I'd felt reading that newspaper article in the library. We moved out of that apartment about a year and a half later. Nothing dramatic, just a normal move, better school district, bigger space. I never went back. I don't know who lives in that unit now, or in Eliza's old apartment beside it. Part of me hopes whoever they are sleeps just fine. But if you ever move into a new building, one that replaced something older, something you never bothered to ask about, and you hear crying through the wall late at night, don't press your ear against it like I did. Just knock on the door in the morning and ask who used to live there before you. Adele. If this story gave you chills, subscribe for more real horror from across North America. Comment below. Will you stay in that apartment or leave from there?